Why do so many people over 60 sit down at the end of the day, look at their own legs, and feel like they belong to someone else? Heavy, tight, swollen around the ankles, tired in a way that sleep doesn't seem to fix. Most people shrug it off as the price of getting older, something you're simply supposed to accept, like reading glasses or a creaky knee. But here's the question almost nobody asks out loud. What if that heaviness isn't your body slowing down at all? What if it's actually your body sending you a very specific, very fixable signal, and you've just never been taught how to listen to it? To understand what's really happening, you have to rethink something most of us got backwards in school. We were taught that the heart is the sole engine of circulation, tirelessly pumping blood through 60,000 miles of vessels. That's true for the trip down. But getting blood back up from your feet to your heart is a completely different physical problem because it means moving fluid uphill, against gravity, through the longest and lowest veins in your entire body. Your heart alone was never built to do that efficiently. It needed a partner, and evolution gave it one in an unexpected place: your calves. Deep inside your lower legs sits a network of muscle and vein tissue that physiologists often refer to as the body's secondary circulatory pump. Every time your calf muscle contracts, it squeezes the veins running through it like someone gently stepping on a garden hose, forcing blood upward. One-way valves inside those veins snap shut behind the wave of blood, preventing it from sliding back down. Walk, climb stairs, stand up from a chair, and that pump fires automatically, dozens of times without you ever noticing. It's one of the most elegant pieces of engineering in human physiology, and most of us go decades without knowing it exists. Now here's where it gets interesting and a little unsettling. As we move past our 50s and 60s, something quiet and gradual starts to happen. We sit more, we take shorter strides. We favor the elevator over the stairs, not out of laziness, but because joints ache and balance feels less certain. Each of those small, reasonable choices reduces how often the calf pump gets triggered. The muscle doesn't just get weaker in the way a bicep does when you stop lifting weights, its rhythm changes. It stops firing as reliably, and when that rhythm falters, blood and fluids start to linger in the lower legs instead of being efficiently pushed back toward the heart. That lingering is what you're actually feeling when your ankles look puffier by dinner time, or your legs feel like they're dragging by mid-afternoon. This is the part that surprises most people when a vascular specialist finally explains it plainly. The swelling and heaviness are frequently not a heart problem, and they're not always a sign of serious vein disease either. In a large number of cases, they're simply a mechanical pump that has gone quiet from underuse. Which means the fix isn't a pill, and it isn't necessarily more walking, because walking alone doesn't always recruit the calf through a full enough range of motion to reawaken it, especially if your stride has already shortened with age. What actually works is far smaller, far more deliberate, and far more overlooked than anyone expects. Before we walk through exactly how to retrain that pump, it helps to understand why this matters for more than just comfort. Poor venous return isn't only about looking a little swollen in your shoes by evening. Over years, chronic pooling can stretch vein walls, weaken the one-way valves inside them, and contribute to skin changes, aching, and in more advanced cases, visible varicosities. It can also quietly undermine confidence in movement. When your legs feel unreliable, you stand up more cautiously, you sit down more often, and that caution itself reduces the very muscle activity your circulation depends on. It becomes a slow, self-reinforcing loop. Less movement leads to more pooling leads to more discomfort, and more discomfort leads to even less movement. Recognizing that loop is often the first step toward breaking it. What follows is a sequence that clinicians and physical therapists have used for years with older adults recovering mobility, managing mild venous insufficiency, or simply trying to keep their legs functional and comfortable through their 70s and 80s. It isn't a workout in the traditional sense. There's no sweating, no equipment, and nothing that will leave you sore the next day. It's closer to a rehearsal, a way of reminding a dormant system how to do the job it was originally built for. And it builds in a specific order, each step preparing the tissue and nervous system for the one that follows. The starting point is deceptively small, a seated heel raise. You sit in a sturdy chair, feet flat on the floor, and without lifting your toes, you slowly raise your heels a few inches off the ground, then lower them with control. That's the entire movement. No resistance, no speed, nothing dramatic. But underneath that simplicity, something important is happening. Lifting the heel forces the calf muscle to shorten and thicken, which compresses the deep veins running through it exactly the way walking would, only in a completely controlled, joint-friendly setting. Research into venous physiology in older adults has repeatedly shown that even low-intensity, repeated calf contraction meaningfully increases venous outflow velocity. In plain terms, blood moves faster and more efficiently back toward the heart, even without any real exertion. Do this slowly 10 to 15 times and pause if you feel any cramping. Speed is not the goal here, consistency is. Rushing through it recruits the wrong muscles and skips the very contraction you're trying to train. Once that pump starts responding, the next layer is joint mobility, specifically at the ankle and knee. This is where a lot of people get stuck without realizing it. Long periods of sitting don't just affect the calf, they let the knee and ankle joints stiffen into a narrow, shallow range of motion. And a joint that barely moves surrounds itself with tissue that barely circulates. The remedy is a gentle seated slide, sitting tall, sliding one heel backward along the floor to bend the knee, then extending it forward again to nearly straight, slow and unforced, like oiling a hinge rather than testing its limits. This motion draws blood through the popliteal region behind the knee, an area that tends to become a bottleneck when mobility narrows with age. Physical therapists frequently note that restoring even modest range of motion here reduces the sensation of tightness that so many older adults describe as "my legs just feel stuck." From there, the body is ready to reintroduce something it's been quietly avoiding, bearing weight while standing. But without the fear that usually comes with it. This is where a supported weight shift comes in. Standing behind a stable chair or countertop, hands resting lightly for balance, you shift your weight gently onto one leg, back to center, then onto the other, again and again in a slow, pendulum-like rhythm. This might look almost too subtle to matter, but it's teaching your nervous system something your brain has slowly been unlearning: how to trust each leg to bear load independently and smoothly. Balance, confidence, and circulation are more connected than most people assume. When older adults feel unsteady, they unconsciously stiffen their legs and shorten their movements, and that stiffness itself restricts blood flow. Restoring smooth, confident weight transfer isn't just about avoiding falls, it directly supports the rhythmic muscle contraction that circulation depends on. The fourth movement takes that confidence and turns it into function: the supported sit to stand. Feet flat, slightly behind the knees, leaning forward until your weight shifts over your feet, then rising slowly to standing before lowering back down with the same unhurried control. This single motion, repeated dozens of times a day in ordinary life without anyone noticing, recruits the thighs, hips, and calves together in one coordinated contraction, making it one of the most circulation-friendly movements a human body performs when it's done slowly. The mistake almost everyone makes is dropping quickly back into the chair, which robs the muscles of the sustained engagement that actually drives blood flow. Taking 3 full seconds to rise, and 3 more to sit, transforms an ordinary daily action into something closer to therapeutic exercise, without ever feeling like exercise at all. The final movement in the sequence ties everything together into a single flowing pattern: a controlled heel lift into a shallow knee bend, performed while standing with light hand support. Heels rise, calves engage, pause, lower. Knees bend slightly as if beginning to sit, then straighten again, standing tall. It sounds almost too simple to matter, and that's exactly the point. The goal was never intensity, it's coordination. When the calf, thigh, and hip muscles fire together in sequence rather than in isolation, they create a more powerful and sustained pumping action than any single movement could produce alone. Combined lower body activation like this has been associated with meaningfully better venous return and functional mobility in older adults compared to isolated exercises, because the body was never designed to move one muscle group at a time. Everyday actions, rising, turning, adjusting your stance, already ask your legs to work this way. This movement simply rehearses that pattern deliberately, so your body remembers how to do it well. There's a common misconception tangled up in all of this that deserves to be pulled apart, because it quietly stops people from ever discovering the fix. Many assume that if their legs feel heavy, the answer must be more walking, more cardio, more time on their feet. And while regular walking is genuinely valuable for overall cardiovascular health, it isn't automatically the same thing as calf pump training. A slow, shuffling stride, the kind that naturally develops when joints are a little stiff or balance feels uncertain, often keeps the ankle from bending through its full range. Without that full bend, the calf never fully lengthens and shortens, and the pumping action stays shallow. This is why some people can walk every single day and still end up with swollen ankles by evening. It isn't that they're not trying. It's that the specific mechanical trigger the calf needs isn't being delivered, even though the effort looks, from the outside, like it should be enough. Recognizing this gap between general activity and targeted muscle activation is often the missing piece that finally makes sense of why nothing seemed to help before. There's also a second misunderstanding worth clearing up, this one about swelling itself. Many people assume swollen ankles simply mean they're retaining too much salt, or drinking too much water, or eating the wrong foods the night before. Diet can play a role, certainly, but for a large share of older adults, the more direct cause is mechanical: gravity pulling fluid downward all day, combined with a pump that isn't firing often enough to counteract it. That's an important distinction because it shifts the focus from restriction, cutting out foods, worrying over every glass of water, towards something far more empowering, reactivating a system that's already built into your body. You're not fighting your biology, you're simply reminding a forgotten part of it how to work again. It also helps to understand why this becomes more common specifically in the years after 60, rather than appearing suddenly out of nowhere. Vein walls naturally lose some elasticity with age, meaning they don't snap back into shape as efficiently after being stretched by fluid pressure. At the same time, the valves inside those veins, the one-way gates that stop blood from sliding backward, can weaken slightly over decades of daily use. Neither of these changes alone is usually dramatic. But when you combine gradually less elastic veins, slightly less responsive valves, and a calf muscle that's being asked to contract less often because of quieter, more sedentary days, the entire system's margin for error shrinks. What might have gone completely unnoticed at 40 becomes noticeable at 65, not because something suddenly broke, but because several small, ordinary changes finally added up past a threshold you can feel. There's one more habit worth mentioning, not because it's dramatic, but because it fits into moments when nothing else will. Long car rides, flights, evenings on the couch, or those first few minutes after waking up before you're ready to stand. Lifting your feet slightly off the floor while seated and slowly circling each ankle, 5 rotations one direction, 5 the other, keeps the lowest and often most neglected joint in your body active even when everything else is still. The ankle sits at the very bottom of the circulatory return route, and fluid pooling almost always begins there first. A slow, deliberate circle does more for that region than a quick, tense flick ever could, because larger, unhurried movement recruits more surrounding tissue and encourages fuller drainage. What's striking about all of this is how little any of it resembles traditional exercise advice. There's no sweating, no strain, nothing that demands stamina you might not have. And that's precisely why it tends to work for people who have already been told, sometimes for years, that they're too limited for meaningful movement. The truth is that circulation doesn't respond primarily to intensity. It responds to rhythm, frequency, and coordination. A muscle contracting gently 40 times a day, every day, does more for venous return than a single strenuous walk once a week ever could, because consistency is what retrains a system, not occasional effort. It's worth pausing here to address something people rarely say out loud. There's a quiet psychological weight that comes with feeling like your own legs are working against you. It changes how people move through their homes, how willing they are to go out, how much they second-guess a set of stairs or a grocery trip. When mobility feels uncertain, independence starts to feel conditional. That's part of why this isn't just a physical story, it's an emotional one too. Restoring even a small, reliable sense of control over how your legs feel by the end of the day can quietly restore confidence in far more than just walking. It can be the difference between planning a trip and finding a reason not to, between playing on the floor with a grandchild and watching from the couch. None of this replaces medical care, and it's important to say clearly that persistent swelling, sudden pain, one leg swelling more than the other, skin discoloration, or warmth in a specific area are signs that deserve a conversation with a doctor, not a home routine. Circulatory health exists on a spectrum, and simple muscle pump exercises are most useful for the very common, milder end of that spectrum, the everyday heaviness and tiredness so many people quietly live with rather than a diagnosed vascular condition. Understanding that distinction matters, because knowing when something is ordinary and manageable versus when it needs professional attention is itself a form of taking your health seriously. What makes this whole picture worth sitting with isn't just the mechanics of veins and valves. It's the reminder that agging doesn't automatically mean surrendering comfort or independence to forces outside your control. So much of what gets labeled as just getting older turns out, on closer inspection, to be simply disuse, systems in the body that go quiet not because they've worn out, but because they've stopped being asked to do their job. The calf pump is one of those systems. It doesn't need to be rebuilt, it needs to be reminded. So the next time you notice that familiar heaviness settling into your legs by late afternoon, consider treating it not as an inevitability, but as information, a small, honest signal from a part of your body that's simply asking to be used again. The muscles that carry you through your days were built to move in quiet, rhythmic ways long before anyone called it exercise. Sometimes the most meaningful thing you can do for your long-term mobility isn't found in pushing harder. It's found in remembering how to move gently, consistently, and on purpose, and trusting that your body still knows exactly what to do with that invitation.